the Florida Writer Podcast, a discussion about writing and other things.
Hello, and welcome to another edition of the Florida Writer Podcast with your host, Alison Nissen. And today I am lucky enough to have with me Dr. Cindy Childress. Cindy, can you please give us a 60-second elevator pitch about who you are and what you write?
Yes, thank you so much, Alison. I'm happy to be here. I am Dr. Cindy, the expert's ghostwriter, and I help entrepreneurs write books that make money and an impact. I do this through bespoke ghostwriting services when I write the book for you and you publish it under your own name. And I also have a book writing program called Crank Out Your Book in 8 weeks. And in that course, I teach people how to be their own ghostwriter to quickly crank out their best-selling book.
How did you get started ghostwriting?
Yeah, well, I do have a PhD in English, so the Dr. Cindy thing is not just a marketing gimmick. But after I finished my degree, I'd fallen in love with a man who had the opportunity to live and work in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. So he invited me to go with him, and I did. So that is my husband of 13 years, Jack. And all said, I lived in Malaysia and also Indonesia for 7 years. So when I came back to America, I had a 7-year work gap to overcome. And through overcoming that work gap, instead of returning to academia, I found my way into the entrepreneur space. And after starting a writing company and offering many kinds of writing, I really quickly realized books are my passion. And it's also where I am much different from anybody else in the field. So I niched down there in 2017 and really haven't looked back.
So what's your process? So someone comes to you and says, Dr. Cindy, I want to write my book. It's fantastic. It's a great story. And everyone in the world will have their lives changed. Help. What do you do first?
Yes, the first thing I do is look at who's the one person we're writing this book for and why do they want to read it now? And with those questions addressed, and by the way, this also works for fiction, even though I mainly work with nonfiction authors, with these questions addressed, a lot of the decisions for the book become a lot easier, like what level of information to include, what stories are they going to find relatable and helpful and which are not. And then we also look at what are your goals for your book. And I was just in a conversation with a woman earlier today who thought she needed to write an 80,000 word book that was very heavily researched, which is a lot to take on for a first book. But in our conversation about what her goals for this book are, and also just what her authority and experience is, we realized that something more like a self-help book, which is, her firsthand experience of how she has solved these problems for herself and outcomes for her clients that she helps solve the problem as well, and different tools and things that they implement. And really, like, that's enough for this first book. And then maybe in the future, as she builds her authority in the space that she's in, then, she might go on to write that more researched book, but it's not necessary for the first book. And if you're not thinking about what those goals are and what this book actually needs to be, you can wind up taking on more work than is really necessary and, writing something that isn't really what it needed to be. And then with all these decisions made, we look at, okay, what does need to be in this book and brainstorm what becomes your detailed table of contents.
So you like to start with the table of contents?
After we figure out who the book is for and what the goals are for the book, yes.
Is it important to start with the first chapter? Is the first chapter much like a hook when you're writing some sort of like a self-help book?
Well, yes, the first chapter is like a hook, almost like in copywriting. When you think about the first text that appears in an email, that would be a hook. But just like in copywriting, a lot of times they don't start with the hook. The hook comes later as they're writing the middle part of the copy. I find the same thing to be true with ghostwriting. And, we usually write a chapter one, but I don't put too much heavy emphasis on it because I've just seen from experience that almost always by the time the book is finished, the chapter one, sometimes we just cut it and it's just axed and it's gone. So like, why spend hours and weeks bleeding over something that may not even stay? And then if it does stay, I find that is the chapter that gets the biggest facelift, or the entire, the reality show, The Swan, like that level of a makeover. And so, it's a mistake to spend that much time trying to make it perfect, because it's just, by the time the rest of the content's done, so often it just radically changes what that needs to be.
I have a philosophy as a writing instructor that you take your final paragraph of that composition that you just finished, you cut it, you stick it in the first paragraph and just write a new ending, because now you know where your essay is going. You already have your roadmap. You summarized it perfectly. Put it in the beginning, add a new hook, change the ending again, just write a second ending because you've already written one. And
Yes.
It's amazing how much clearer the text will be for the audience.
Yes, I think that's a great idea. And I do usually write the conclusion and then go back and write the introduction rather than the other way around. What I also don't do too much of, but I've also heard of, is writing the conclusion first, which is, it kind of takes that a step further. To me, I feel like that's as challenging as writing an introduction before you know what you're introducing. How can we conclude what we've now discussed before it's discussed? So I'm not sure about that myself, but it's an idea out there.
It is an idea for sure. Tell me, do you work mostly with people that want to be traditionally published or self-published?
I mostly find people who are better suited for self-publishing. Although in the last year, I've worked with 3 clients, one of whom already had a book deal. And here's a surprise for folks. You may not have thought about this before, but when you get a book deal, you don't hand your manuscript over to them and then just wait until they mail you a copy of your book. What actually happens is you get paired with an editor, and that editor is going to mark up your manuscript with feedback and send it to you to then fix. And I worked with a client who got to that point in the publishing pathway and said, okay, I need more help than what this publisher is giving me to get this done. And so he hired me to implement that editor's notes for him. And then I also worked on 2 book proposals, one of which has already been accepted, has an offer and a book deal now in place with an imprint of Hatchet Publishing, which I'm very proud of. And another one that's already agented but doesn't have representation yet. And what I'll say is different about those is all 3 of those clients already had very sizable audiences. I'm thinking to the tune of like 500,000 YouTube followers. And, that's the kind of audience size that talks even in a competitive market. And then for people who don't even have maybe 50,000 or 100,000 followers on a platform somewhere, and the idea of getting to there sounds like several years' work, then the other option is self-publishing, which, depending on what your goals are, can still totally accomplish them. And, you can have just as much success as you could have traditionally, but faster and with more creative control. So it really depends on, I try to help people know which one they're a better fit for, so they don't waste their time in either arena. And then just try to make sure, no matter which way they pick, that they're positioned to have the success they wanted.
You also have a course called Crank Out Your Book in 8 Weeks. How does that differ than your ghostwriting practice?
Yeah, so I created Crank Out Your Book in 8 Weeks because I would be on 15-minute calls with people. And I used to have an offer I did when we would do what I just described as how to start the book with the, figuring out the audience and your goals for the book, so we know exactly what kind of book we need to write here. And then I would create the table of contents for them. And then we would be in a handoff meeting and they would say, okay, but what else? And then I would say, now you don't want to hire me for ghostwriting. Is that right? And they would say, no, I want to write it myself. And I would say, okay, then bye-bye. Let me know when you finished if you want to come back for editing. And they would be like, but I want more help. So I created this course. It's got the exact processes that I go through to write the first draft for my ghostwriting clients in 8 weeks, which would be the first 2 months of our work together. So I just broke down what all of those processes are and what it can look like on a day-to-day basis so that you could get 50, that's an exaggeration, 30,000 words written within the 8 weeks. Although I do have a student who wrote 50,000 words in the last cohort. So more is possible, but that's the goal for the course. And then you get out of your way and just do the writing when you implement the ghostwriter strategies, like interviewing yourself. When I'm ghostwriting, I write interview questions and then I interview the client. And then here in the course, you're creating your own questions. And then when you are answering them, essentially, every time you sit down to write, you're the authority. You had the experience. You can just answer questions about it and not have to second guess yourself of like, what could I say here? You already know what to say. You're going to answer these questions. And that's how people write really fast. People that are not wouldn't normally even call themselves writers can do it too.
I love the idea of interviewing yourself. I do that sort of. I have in my own personal blog. Mine is I write flash memoir, and I will come up with a memory, and then I will boil it down to what was the lesson in the memory, and then I just write the scenario of the 5-minute incident or however long it was. Sometimes it was like 30 seconds and sometimes it was, a day long, but typically it's very short. But I do interview myself, and, I hadn't thought about it that way. I think that's such a great idea. And, people do that with their fiction characters. They'll interview them and they'll come up with things. What's the most important thing what's the biggest mistakes that new writers make?
Yeah, well, one mistake that I've seen new writers make is when they sit down and write, if the first thing they write isn't really, really good, they get really disappointed in themselves. So that's why I'm a big fan of not going back and reading it as you're writing your first draft. I know sometimes that's almost impossible to ask people to do, but because once you read, of course, it's probably not going to be very good. Honestly, even for me, with the level of experience and education that I have, when I first get started on a new project, everything I write is not pure gold. But in the course of getting in there and getting to know their voice and getting to know their content, it gets better and better as I keep writing more. So my advice to avoid this is to just trust the process and keep writing, because the more you do, the better you're going to get at it. But also because once you get into that groove and you are writing better, you're going to have more insight into how to go back and fix what wasn't up to snuff there from the early stuff. It's really hard to even figure out what's wrong and solve it before you've got enough written to have really established what the rhythm is going to be.
That's such great advice. It really is. I find it hard not to edit along the way. I'm an edit paragraph by paragraph person. I like to, but I have been writing a long time, so I'm more familiar with my own style. And I have a feeling that there are writers on every end of the spectrum. I know I've heard of best-selling writers that, write the first draft all the way to the end before they even go back. And then there's those that edit and write along the way. So we can cover the gamut on that. Dr. Cindy, how can people get in touch with you?
Yes, feel free to go to my website, www.cindychildress.com. You'll find a contact form where you can send me a message, and then also take advantage of the free quiz that is at cindychildress.com/quiz. And you'll also see it on the homepage when you arrive to my website. That is the Discover Your Number One best-selling author personality. And with your results, you'll be able to unlock your author superpower. So do take the quiz, and I would love to hear from anyone that wants to reach out.
All right. I'm going to go take that quiz because I would like to see what it says about me. It's like a personality test, right?
Yes, I know. Those are irresistible.
Well, Dr. Cindy, are you ready to switch to our rapid fire questions?
I think so.
What is your favorite color?
Red.
Red. Well, I can see you because we're on Zoom, but the audience can't, and I can see lots of red behind you. So cats or dogs?
That's not as easy for me to answer as you would think. I have 4 cats and 1 dog. I think I'm just going to say no comment because I have a cat here and I have a dog there right now.
No, we don't need to break out in war right now. That's for sure. And my last question, do you have a book on your nightstand?
Yes, I do. In fact, I can't even tell you what it is right now, but I definitely do. It's one I got for free at an event. And I'll just say, this is like a bonus tip. If you have the opportunity to speak at an event, and it's a great thing to ask the organizers if it would make sense for all the attendees to have a copy of your book, because I throw away almost everything that I get at events, those little free promotional items, but I always keep the books. So there's one that I haven't opened yet. The reason I don't know what it's about is because it was in my goodie bag and I didn't choose it, but I'm going to open it and dive in.
All right. Well, that sounds like a plan. Curl up with your 4 cats and your dog. Enjoy the book. I am so glad that you were able to come.
Thank you. It was a blast.
You have been listening to another edition of the Florida Writer Podcast with your host, Alison Nissen. Alison out. Woo! We're all done.
Woo! Cool. That was fun.
Dr. Cindy Childress is the expert's ghostwriter. She's a ghostwriter and book editor for entrepreneurs who want to write books that make money and an impact. Her business, Childress Business Communications, took gold in 2 categories in the International Business Awards in 2021, Company of the Year and Entrepreneur of the Year in business or professional services. Her clients go on to achieve best-selling status, give TEDx Talks, win book awards, and more. She holds a PhD in English from the University of Louisiana at Lafayette and is the foster mom for dogs and cats with Citizens of Animal Protection in Houston. For more information about Dr. Cindy Childress, visit her at her website at cindychildress.com. For more information about the Florida Writers Association, visit us at floridawriters.org.